Hi and welcome. I'm Iris Benrubi, your host for Building Relationships in Isolation. And today I've got a very special guest. I'm really excited to have him on. I've got Paul Simard. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And Paul is a founder and creator of HuMEnity. That's HuMenity. So let's jump right into this, Paul. What is this all about? Why is it spelled that way?
HuMEnity obviously is a derivative of the word humanity, which is an actual English word as opposed to humanity, which is not.
It
And
is
really,
now. It's now an
it,
official word.
we're going down that road. We're taking it there. Really what it came down to is my whole interest in starting this organization and really this space, if you will, came as a trigger point was in 2017 when I lost my job. And as a single income family, three kids and all those things, I started to ask some questions about, my role and how to show up and what was expected of me. And this brought me into, some different communities, men's work, and, specifically, and they each had their different approach and their sort of different goal. But one of the things as I was talking to the men themselves was, a common thread was this idea of not being seen, of not feeling like what they really wanted to express to the world was going to be accepted, was going to be something that people would understand, and so on and so forth. And so it almost felt as if a lot of men were feeling as if they were somehow different from the rest of humanity. And on top of that, we had everything that was going on with Me Too, and the patriarchy and toxic masculinity. And so, the very notion that in fact the masculine and maleness could be something that was actually positive and was invited to be expressed was also being challenged quite aggressively at times. And so when in 2019 I started to think about creating my own space, something that could kind of live in the middle of sort of some of the extremes that I was seeing. This idea of making men feel like a part of humanity was really a central point of what I wanted to do, and it just made sense. Just change one letter, and off we go. And it really is. It's just meant to be a space where men, either individually or as a group, can come together and have a chance to really express and work through what it is they're feeling, and to have a place where they can be seen without judgment, without any kind of metric being tied to what it is they're going through at that particular time.
Yeah, and that brings up a really interesting point. And historically, men have been the leaders of humanity. And here we're recreating a space for them to be part of
Mm,
humanity. And so, what I really like is I don't like this part, that out of your loss of your job and you hitting your own obstacles, your own walls, you had to face some of your own questions, which may not have even been questions before when you had a job, but really facing what's possible, questioning what you've always been told, that you've been able to create a whole new world.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's so true. And you're right, men, and I think there's very little argument that it always hasn't been for the better, that men have been the creators of so much of our societal structure that we currently live within. So much of it has been based on greed and on sort of I think the best way to describe what men, especially men who look like me, white men, cis men, have created is really based on this idea of power over, right? And so how many people can I get power over? And the more people I have power over, the more I will have, and the more I will be able to consume and collect and all of these things, which, back in the 80s, that was the goal, right? Like you had to, who could have the most cars, the best cars, the most houses, you needed to have the shout. All of these things were the metrics for success. Um, and so, they were also built so much on things that were outside of ourselves. So very little of it was about valuing the person themselves, right? Like it was was always about what did you do, what did you build, what did you create that was really outside of you, and very little about who you were as a person. And so it's really, it sounds a little trite, but so much of it is just allowing men an opportunity to reconnect with their feelings and with the things that drive them from the heart, as opposed to from the head, or worse still, from somebody else's decisions on what they should drive towards.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to maybe unplug your earbuds and replug them, and then there's a little bit of static. I'd love to have a
Sure.
clearer line.
Hopefully that's better.
Okay, so far it's great.
Good.
Yeah,
Sorry about
so
that.
yeah, it sounds great. So it sounds like what you're saying is that giving men, and I'm going to say at this point, this has also impacted women as well, who have moved into the corporate world, that have been encouraged to take on their more masculine parts of themselves,
Mm.
to measure themselves as well. Now, I think that there's probably less pressure for women as in general, but there was a train of thought to really start to question the historical or ancestral stories that we've been fed, whether through media or family, about what success really means.
Absolutely. I think this is the moment in time. And what's really, you know, it was already, I think, happening before COVID-19.
And I'm
And
going to get you to try it without your earbuds, see if that'll work, because it's still a lot of static.
okay, sure. How is that?
Sounds better.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Time to get a new set of earbuds. Um, no, I think it was already happening before COVID-19. And I think, these questions only have been accelerated during this lockdown, where either men are finding themselves working from home in this different environment with kids running around, and they're doing all of these things that they didn't know kids even did because they haven't been around them for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To unfortunately, losing their jobs entirely, being on furlough, all of these challenging moments. And so it really is forcing men to reflect in a more, I think, introspective way about what it is that they want and how they want to show up in the world, because they realize that everything that they had been driving towards and thinking was success is so fragile. It literally is so fragile. And, before that, we had these talks about technology taking everyone's jobs and how AI was going to be, and all these different things that were coming around. And so this is a moment where I think a lot of men are going through that reflection. And what's worse is that, where you see so much wonderful sort of collegiality amongst women, and, they gather and they chat and they have these conversations about things that are really important to them. Men have no idea how to do that. Like, if it's not about the hockey game or, the race car drive, like whatever, they have no idea. Like, it really is a difficult conversation for them.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say, and we're going to bring this into COVID, in that COVID has imposed some changes on both men and women. And
Mm.
we're going to focus mostly on men here, in that they're now working from home. They have their kids running around trying to look professional on their phone calls, right? Realizing maybe either what they've been missing out on, or what else there is, or different roles to play. And for you, and I imagine with a lot of men, when you lose your job, and I would say that men in general tend to identify with their job and their position and their success, when you come face to face with all of that, that there is the opportunity to create something new.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, what you've just described is obviously what we would love to see happening in most of the situations, because that's a very positive outcome. But there's also some of the negative that comes out of it, of course, right? One of the first things that made me sort of realize that men were responding to this differently was this sort of rise all of a sudden in domestic violence that we were hearing about, as men were all of a sudden at home more. Maybe the relationship was already tense, and now this is being expressed, or maybe the person was already violent and now they're home all the time with more opportunity. So there was a lot of negative that came with it, but I think there's also been a lot of positive as well. in the sense that, there are men who are now spending their time with their kids. And in fact, I've spoken to a lot of men who find they're more productive at home. And so they're actually able to carve out more time to be more intentional with their kids and with their spouses, which also makes them question whether they really want to go back to the 90-hour-a-week, job that they had to do when they were in the office, traveling an hour and a half to get downtown and then an hour and a half to get back and missing dinner and all of these things. So, there's some definite challenges. And of course, you spoke to the fact that both men and women will be feeling these things. How many men or women were ready to be homeschoolers, right? Like overnight, we all had to become professional homeschoolers. And that's a challenge for anyone. So, yeah.
Yeah, and what you've just talked to about the increase in violence, I've interviewed a couple other experts on relationships who talked about how there's so many more divorces coming up, a lot of divorce from China, and they both said the same thing, that divorce didn't come out of COVID. What COVID did is magnify the cracks that were already there.
Absolutely.
So COVID can't create that domestic violence. There was already a tendency to either be violent, anger management, that's been magnified. But I also hear almost a T where you get a choice to turn left or turn right.
Yeah.
Because going on that same road that you've always been doing is at least here in North America, has stopped in most of the world.
I mean, absolutely. I think that's actually where the trouble starts, right? Is it anybody who expects under these conditions to just keep going forward, business as usual, is not aware of the reality that they are currently living in. And that's when they're going to come up against a very abrupt moment in time where they get confronted with something. And that's where the trigger will actually get activated, right? That's where the trouble will actually kick in. Again, I've spoken to so many, and even myself, I can say that, I've likened it sometimes to, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock in Speed, where under these tense conditions, when there's a bomb under the bus, all of it, like everything just seems to work because there's this sense of urgency. You have to work well together. And I think that if you go into it like that and say, we're confined to this home, we have to work well together. And so what can we do to get to that point? That was something that we did early on, and we just made sure that everybody knew what their roles were. And of course, there were tense moments, and I went through my moments of fear, of the unknown, and how do I protect my family against something I can't see? And that, to be frank, no politician or doctor was actually able to tell me exactly what we were facing either. And so even the experts, in quotes, didn't really know what we should be doing. So, even the ones of us who went through a positive conversation of how to navigate this, we still had our moments. We're human, right? So, I think it's about the intentionality and being aware of this moment in time, and understanding that it's not going to be the same as it was before, and that's a good thing, I think.
Oh, I definitely agree that it's a good thing. For me, I found this bigger sense of peace, really connecting with myself. And, even with couples that I work, some of them things have gotten magnified, but for some of them, things have calmed down because they found that they have to work as a unit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the men that you work with. What have you seen? What's the opportunity? What's the new path that you're creating in HuMEnity?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. First and foremost, I think this is one of those, because it's a collective moment in time that we are all sharing, right? So you think of some of the other crises that we've gone through, even Me Too, right? It was very easy for men to say, not me, that's not me, I never did that, look the other way and just keep going, right? It was very, very easy for men to do that. COVID is not like that. COVID can affect you and the people around you indiscriminately. It's got nothing to do with your past behaviors. It really is something that will affect all of us. And so one of the things that we're actually seeing, not only in HuMEnity, but in other men's circles as well, is men actually realizing they're not in this alone. They can put their hand up and say, I need help. I need help. I need somewhere to go. I need to know that I'm not alone in this. And so first and foremost, we're just seeing men having the opportunity to actually lean into this idea of reaching out and asking for help. So that right there is a first and beautiful step. Of course, what that also means is that not every man has the courage to do that. And so even under this situation, there are going to be men who still feel like they have to lone wolf it, and go on it alone, and find a way to dig deep and to do all those things that men want to do. So so those are some of the very high level things. I think from a very personal point of view, there is this idea of powerlessness that is a common thread with a lot of men. Some of them have parents that are in old folks' homes, and they're not even allowed to go and see them. They don't know if they're going to be safe. They don't know what the conditions are like. Some of the people that I've spoken to, had, some of their parents were in some of the worst residence homes that we've found here in Quebec, and they had no idea that this was happening behind closed doors. And so how do you navigate that? Others, were, restaurateurs whose entire business, their livelihood, their ability to support their families depended on the ability to gather people around food. And so they're having to find new ways to think about how they've done things. I was listening to, I didn't know this person personally, but somebody was sharing a story where somebody had just started a bakery, literally just started a bakery, and they were able to pivot very quickly, where what they're now doing is they're actually selling the recipes online. And so we're all at home. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do with their time. We're worried about all these different, well, less so today, but are we going to run out of bread, right? This staple. Well, a lot of people took to making bread, and so having these recipes and having access to them. So,
You know what? Here in Toronto, my mother wanted me to pick her up flour. I couldn't find flour anywhere in town. And finally, I found a place that sold it it was like 5 kilos or 10 pounds for Americans. And It was in a clear plastic bag with no label. The bakeries were starting to sell their stuff because there was such shortage. That's toilet paper.
We have a 20 kilogram bag. I don't know when that's going to get used. But I guess better safe than sorry. But so I think we are seeing, again, we're also seeing that ability to be resilient. We're seeing people who have lost their jobs. One of the men in our circles was at Cirque du Soleil, and he was actually traveling when this all broke down. He was able to get in just before they completely shut down the airports and things, but he came back to no job, and it's allowed him to think about, well, where do I really want to be anyways? Was this really where I wanted to be? And so he and his partner have started their own creativity business, and they've actually got 2 or 3 different channels that they're looking at, and while it's obviously taking time to build up, he's also somewhat inspired and taking the time to reflect and connect with his stepson. So there's all these wonderful things that, as you've alluded to already, are coming out of this too.
Yeah, and one of the common themes that have come out in the interviews that you've just touched on is the how crucial it is in our ability to be able to pivot.
Totally, absolutely. I think it's probably one of the most underestimated talents. We always think of pivot, I think, in too much of a corporate term, right? Like when we use the term pivot, it's so common to see that in like the startup world and in the corporate world where these corporations make pivots. But we as people, as individuals, as parents, we need to be able to make pivots as well. We need to be able to understand that, you have to be able to move and respond to what's happening. Never mind just yourself as an individual having that ability, right? But also you have to understand that your kids are going to need to pivot as well, right? Like my 10-year-old she's just constantly, she's like an Energizer bunny. She constantly is moving. She's always on the go. I need to do my job. My wife needs to do, all the things that she does. She's got her own little business and all these different things. And we have a 10-year-old that wasn't able to go and play with her kid, with her friends, and was being asked to do homeschooling, which requires a lot of independence. Like, we needed to adapt our pivot or model our pivot to how she was going to be able to pivot. Like, we couldn't impose a pivot on her. It never would have worked. So pivoting, I think, is a very underestimated skill. And a lot of pivoting as well, I think this is super important, is about allowing. And especially for men, we want to control, we want to fix, we want to know what the next 12 things are going to be. And the fact of the matter is that that's not possible in this context. So you need to be able to pivot in a way where you're also allowing whatever's coming at you, you can move around it, and you can move with it.
Yeah, and I'm hearing two things. It's the allowing, the surrendering, but also being willing to take action and alignment, trusting yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite analogies is around a river, right? So a river doesn't intentionally think about the path it's going to take, and it doesn't come up against rocks and start pounding up against them until it gets through so that it can continue. The river is very intentional in where it wants to go, in the sense that it's going to move in this direction and it's going to flow over the obstacles that come with it. And if there's a curve in the embankment, it's going to move with that curve. But at the end of the day, it's going to get to where it needs to get to. And that's, I think, something that more men need to take on, is this idea, like, you're not a river with a stick of dynamite that's just going to blast its way on the straight line. Like, you've got to move with the environment, with what's happening around you. It's essential.
Yeah, and I think that's the big call that's happening in the globe right now, is that dynamite has been used for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we have all of the fallout, for, without getting too political, with global warming and our resources, and that we now have an opportunity to work with nature rather than
Mm-hmm.
overpower. There's another word I'm looking for to.
Well, there's extraction is one for sure. Again, I think it comes back to the idea of power with, as opposed to power over, right? You need to work with the power and the energies that are in the natural world, as opposed to trying to dominate them and to try and manipulate them in the way that serves us. It doesn't work. We will lose that game every single time.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you is what you're doing right now with the men is an opportunity to pivot from what men have been doing for centuries, decades, centuries, millenniums,
Mm.
and an opportunity to pivot. And a lot of the women that I work with are single women who often complain about, they want a more mature man, a more evolved man, which includes the ability to have those deeper conversations that you said until recently were very difficult for men to have, because that's how we socialize our boys. Don't cry, put your chin up, versus, a girl falls, we go and cuddle her. So two very different messages. And so I think that this is a beautiful conversation for women to hear about the path that men are on, what's possible. And I would love for you to maybe share someone or a couple examples of what you've seen develop in these you call it a circle?
Mm. Yeah. So, we obviously did this. It was much more impactful when we were able to do it in person, and not only with HuMEnity, but I've spent time in other circles with other organizations as well. And, it doesn't happen instantaneously. So that's the first thing, right? So we talk about, you hear a lot of talk about safe spaces for men to be vulnerable and to be open. And I think, again, it sounds strange to have to create something like that intentionally, because for women, it kind of comes much more naturally. But you really do need to set it, like, the guidelines and give a rule book to a certain degree for men to feel safe. I think what's actually even more important is the comfort that they can feel brave, right? You can never be sure that it's actually a safe place, because you just don't know what other men are going to do. But it's more about putting people in a position where they feel comfortable with the idea of being brave. And, just to give an example, like one of the places we typically start, especially if we've got men coming together for the first time, is you'll often hear conversations are anchored around this idea of the masks, right, that we wear. Men will, as do most people, we have our little backpack full of masks that we wear. And it's important to start understanding where those masks actually started to be sort of formed, where we started to get the idea that we needed to put on these masks. And I remember, it was actually just before the lockdown as well, where we were having a conversation around this topic. And the first man to speak, actually, this clearly touched him in a very deep way. And it was actually somebody that I've known for years, but I'd never had this kind of an engagement with him. But he talked about how the mask of him being stoic, of being this sort of pillar of strength, how it actually came about as a very young boy growing up in Europe, and how, with his siblings and so on and so forth, if they were out playing and doing those kinds of things and in public, this is where it affected him the most. Where if he got hurt, or if something was bothering him and he expressed an emotion, his father, who was of a very, particular generation and background, would embarrass and shame him for that. And so he developed this idea that when I'm feeling something, I need to be stoic. I need to put on this face where it doesn't show. And and these get built up over time, right? We learn and we model and we take the messages and the cues from people. Boys don't cry. How many times have you seen, if anybody has either been a son or seen boys playing at a sport, and they get hurt on the football field or whatever, the coach will tell them to stop crying, this is horrible, but stop playing like a girl. Like the idea that by playing like a girl, that automatically means you're not going to be able to win. Hamm, a very famous.
Also meaning that you don't belong with us. It's like,
yes,
we're going to kick you out from this boys club.
If you're going to be like that, there's no space for you here. And again, I was just going to share that it reminded me of a quote from Mia Hamm, a very famous, maybe one of the most prolific soccer players in history. She said at one point that she went out for a boys soccer team, and somebody said, she overheard the comment that, oh, that person runs like a girl. And Mia turned around and said, well, if you train really hard, one day you'll be able to also. Like completely turning it on its head. And I was just like, yeah, that's amazing. Like that's the way to look at it.
And it takes something in this day and age to get to that place where you can reframe it, and not as an exclusivity or a bad or don't belong or inadequate, but as something to aspire to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, to use Mia Hamm, Pele was once asked, who is the one player that you fear that you would never want to play against who's currently playing? And he thought about it for about half a second, and he said, Mia Hamm. He said, that woman doesn't stop for anybody. And it was just like, wow.
Wow, that is a wow.
Yeah, so we have to be very careful about putting people into containers and boxes. And you talked about how we socialize people, the idea of a 4-year-old boy playing with a Barbie doll or wearing pink clothes, it's automatically questioned. And yet we do seem to have less of an issue, I think, with girls who might want to be, we have kind of endearing terms where they're, a tomboy. I remember my 15-year-old being kind of proud of being a tomboy, so it's we have some signal corrections to make in what we say to our children, for sure.
Yeah, and I love that the work that you're doing actually gives us an opportunity now to change what is passed down intergenerationally into the next generations that are coming up.
Yeah. To me, that's actually where I get more excited, is the effect that we can have on fathers of boys, and also hopefully at some point in the future to actually get into the schools to work with, potentially with teachers and with sports coaches and so on and so forth, because While we try to avoid the idea that any man is broken and needs to be fixed, if I can use that analogy for a moment without saying that any man is broken, it's obviously much easier to work with a teen and get them on the healthy path earlier than trying to constantly sort of bring men back to this more centered place where they're more in alignment with themselves, and they're a healthier contributor to the societal story that we're trying to tell.
Yeah, so I love that you're able to address a lot of these things. We did get a comment on the chat acknowledging you for being willing to talk about the domestic violence. It doesn't get touched on very often. But let me ask you, for people who want more information about HuMEnity, or for men who want this type of support, where can they reach out?
So there's really two of the best places. I mean, there's three, I guess, but two of the best would be the website, HuMEnity.co. They can find some information about the programs there, and they can fill out the form and send us an inquiry. So that's one place. We do have we have two groups on Facebook. So one of the groups is an open group where men and women are invited to come, and we share a little bit of content there, and just sort of, every now and again we will open up. We do men's circles once a week. We have a men's circle online, obviously currently, and then we also have a closed group. And so any man who joins the public group will receive an invitation to join the closed group, and that's meant to be a little bit of that safe/brave space. And so that's the other place. And then I'm actually one of the rare people, I think, who's more active on LinkedIn than anywhere else, but people can find me there as well. They'll notice that so HuMEnity is my passion project, and it is something that I sort of offer out there. We do some one-on-one coaching, but my primary job is actually with the United Nations Refugee Agency. So if you come across a Paul Simard that works there, that's me. Not to worry.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give the spelling. I put it in the chat room. It's Paul and then Simard. Yes. And HuMEnity is HuMenity.co.
Correct.
Paul, if there was one thing you would hope our viewers take away from today, what would that be? So I'm torn. I've got two things in my brain. Oh, go for both.
Okay, so the first one is very simple. It's that, especially for the men out there, you're not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone, and you don't have to do this alone. Reach out. I can guarantee you there are other men who are going through your experience and who can relate to what you're feeling in this moment. So don't feel like you have to do it alone, because you're not. That's the first thing. The second thing is, most of the people here are either men or no men, or all these kinds of things. And my favorite word in any language is an African greeting, sawubona, SAWUBONA. And what it means is I see you and I am here for you to be seen. And what I would like to ask people to do is to offer that as a gift to the people in their lives. Offer the seeing and the invitation to be seen, because that is, as whether you're male, female, or any of the other beautiful intersections that are around the world today, that's all we really want. That's what we need. That's what feeds us, is to know that we are seen and that we are accepted for how we want to show up. And so those would be the two things that I would hope for people.
And with that, Paul, I want to say thank you for your time today, for the strategies that you shared, the new opening, the new mindset, and how, that's impacting men's lives, relationships, women's lives, and the difference HuMEnity is making on humanity.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.